to a large recall from General Motors. It involves 600,000 vehicles whose V8 engines can fail without warning.
Mary Barra just exposed secrets about GM's V8 engines, and drivers everywhere are furious. Headlines called it a recall.
Thousands of car owners across the country, more than 800,000 GM vehicles are being recalled due to engine failure.
Dealerships downplayed it as routine.
Shares for General Motors dropping 3.5%, and it comes as GM reports a 40% profit loss for the second quarter.
But buried memos reveal something far darker. Decisions that could cost you money, safety, and trust every time you turn the key. Why were warnings ignored for years? Why are owners left footing the bill? And how close is this scandal to landing in your driveway? The oil gambit. Long before lawsuits and headlines shook the industry, there was a quiet change buried in the fine print of technical bulletins. Service centers across the country began swapping out engine oil, moving from the originally specified 0W20 viscosity to the thicker 0W40 blend. At first glance, it looked like maintenance trivia, nothing more than the sort of mid-cycle adjustment that happens all the time in the world of combustion engines. But as insiders would later reveal, this decision was not born from performance gains or environmental concerns. It was a calculated maneuver designed to push an unavoidable problem further down the road, past the point where the manufacturer would have to pay for it. That quiet substitution became known among critics as the oil gambit. The science sounded convincing when presented in neat laboratory charts. Engineers explained that a heavier oil film could withstand higher thermal stress, cushioning bearings under load and keeping engines alive under extreme towing or high-temperature conditions. In isolation, that argument had merit. A thicker oil can indeed resist breakdown, particularly when mechanical tolerances are under duress. But in practice, the change created a series of hidden costs that landed squarely on the shoulders of everyday owners. The first was simple fuel economy. Engines designed to sip lighter oil suddenly had to churn through something thicker, and that drag translated into lost miles per gallon. Drivers who once averaged 18 miles per gallon began reporting 15 or even lower. Across a lifespan of 150,000 miles, that 3-mile drop at the pump translated into thousands of extra dollars spent, a burden never mentioned in the glossy recall letter. The second hidden cost was reputation. Automotive databases, dealership software, and even third-party resale trackers began flagging trucks and sport utility vehicles with the updated 0W40 specification. What was meant as protection turned into a scarlet sticker. A $70,000 investment instantly carried suspicion on the used market. Families trying to trade in their vehicles discovered offers slashed by thousands, all because of a factory-mandated oil switch that never addressed the deeper mechanical flaw. In online forums, owners vented their frustration, posting photographs of altered oil caps and manuals stamped with new viscosity charts, visual proof that their machines had been compromised at the source. What made the oil gambit so insidious was the illusion of progress it created. On the surface, it looked like decisive engineering, but beneath it lay a strategy of delay. Every quart of thicker oil poured into an engine was less about protection and more about buying precious corporate time. Critics argued the real purpose was never to extend engine life indefinitely, but to delay catastrophic failure until after warranties expired. By thickening the oil film, the engines could limp further, buying corporate accountants a cushion while leaving consumers exposed. In that reading, the oil gambit was less about engineering resilience and more about financial triage. Protect the balance sheet today and let the customer pay tomorrow. It was a short-term fix with long-term consequences, and for many it became the ultimate symbol of misplaced priorities. Secrets like these rarely stay buried forever. One minor adjustment in viscosity charts eventually unraveled into congressional scrutiny, class action lawsuits, and a full-blown trust crisis. And as that trust eroded, another layer of hidden truth began rising to the surface, a secret even more unsettling than a swapped oil cap. If this breakdown of hidden truths is opening your eyes, hit that like button right now so more drivers see it, and drop a comment below. Share your experience or thoughts, because your story strengthens this conversation. Buried engineering warnings. Whispers began not in boardrooms or showrooms, but in the quiet corners of engineering departments where blueprints met hard reality. Within those cubicles, men and women whose entire careers were built on tolerances, measured in thousandths of an inch, began to see data that troubled them deeply. Their simulations and teardown reports revealed crankshafts that were out of alignment, bearings showing premature scarring, and lubrication passages that clogged when engines were stressed under heat. These findings were not vague suspicions scribbled on napkins. They were documented in internal memos, flagged in quality control audits, and debated in late-night meetings where voices grew sharp with urgency. What they found was clear. The engines were not living up to their promised lifespan, and the failures were not rare anomalies, but repeating patterns. Those patterns stretched back further than most people realized. As early as 2022, engineers highlighted abnormal thermal expansion during heavy hauling tests. They warned that bearing clearances were being eaten alive by heat cycles, leaving rod journals starved of lubrication. By 2023, warranty claims were stacking high enough to show undeniable evidence that these were not isolated incidents. Yet when these reports climbed the ladder, the reaction was not immediate redesign or production halts. Instead, the warnings were filed, delayed, and softened until the urgency drained out like oil from a leaky pan. The consequences of ignoring such early warnings were catastrophic for trust. For every engine that seized without warning, there had once been a slide deck projecting the risk. For every stranded family, there had once been a laboratory chart showing bearings failing under stress loads. The knowledge existed, and it was not hidden in secret vaults. It sat on desks, passed through committees, and was discussed in conference calls. Choosing not to act was not the absence of data. It was the burial of engineering truth beneath layers of corporate caution. A chilling truth followed these revelations. The very people paid to safeguard durability had been sidelined in the name of caution. Their data was clear, their warnings were precise, yet bureaucracy and profit turned urgent alarms into muffled whispers. This betrayal of professional integrity deepened the anger of owners who realized that safety had been sacrificed long before a single recall letter was mailed. Those who raised the alarms were not conspiracy theorists, but seasoned professionals with decades of experience in metallurgy, lubrication science, and powertrain durability. They were men and women who had built their reputations designing reliable engines that once defined American strength. To watch their warnings ignored was demoralizing, and some quietly left, carrying with them stories that only later surfaced in depositions and leaked documents. When lawsuits finally dragged these buried warnings into the open, the picture that emerged was not of sudden surprise, but of deliberate delay. Charts stamped with dates from 2002 and 2002 and 3 revealed exactly when the trouble was known. Memos showed how language was softened, how the phrase catastrophic failure was swapped for potential wear, and how silence became the chosen strategy. Ignoring data does not erase reality. Eventually, the truth roars louder than any corporate silence. And just as those hidden memos surfaced, another layer of the scandal was waiting to be uncovered. One tied not just to ignored warnings, but to the cruel game of timing that left owners holding the bill. Warranty roulette. In the world of automotive ownership, nothing looms larger than the ticking clock of a warranty. It is sold as a shield, a promise that if the machine falters before a certain threshold of years or miles, the manufacturer will step in to cover the damage. Yet hidden inside that promise was a brutal gamble, one that left countless owners staring at repair bills that could wreck household finances. The gamble became known among critics as warranty roulette, a cruel game of timing where the difference between coverage and catastrophe could be a single mile or a single day. The official terms sounded generous on paper. Buyers were told they had 5 years or 60,000 miles of powertrain protection. For many, that felt like a safety net wide enough to inspire confidence. But as engines began seizing with little or no warning, a pattern emerged. Failures clustered at 61,000 or 62,000 miles, sometimes at 63,000. In other words, just beyond the invisible line where corporate responsibility ended and consumer responsibility began. It was as though the machines had been programmed with an internal countdown, waiting until the warranty expired before surrendering to the flaw. Owners caught on quickly. and forums filled with bitter jokes about engines equipped with self-destruct timers. The financial stakes were staggering. Replacement engines carried price tags of $15,000 or more before labor and rental expenses were even considered. For families who had financed $70,000 or $80,000 vehicles, the shock was unbearable. Monthly payments continued even as the truck sat immobile in a driveway, waiting for a repair estimate that dwarfed a year's salary. Small business owners were hit even harder. Contractors relying on fleets discovered that a single failure could cancel jobs, erode contracts, and undermine reputations. Warranty roulette was not an abstract problem. It was missed paychecks, canceled deliveries, and families scrambling to adjust budgets already stretched thin. What made the situation worse was the inconsistency of relief. Some fortunate owners reported that regional managers offered partial goodwill repairs, covering part of the cost even beyond 60,000 miles. Others, however, were turned away with a curt explanation: out of coverage. This inconsistency only deepened the sense of betrayal. If the failures were rare, uniform policies might have seemed reasonable, but when thousands of identical cases flooded online communities, the patchwork of responses looked less like fairness and more like selective generosity designed to limit corporate exposure. For many, the lesson was searing. Warranties that once felt like lifelines now resembled ticking clocks. Every trip past 50,000 miles carried a creeping dread. Every oil change brought the question: will the engine hold until the warranty dies, or will it collapse after, leaving the owner abandoned? That anxiety transformed loyal customers into skeptical critics, fueling anger that would not stay confined to service bays or online threads. And with the roulette wheel still spinning, attention soon shifted from the length of coverage to the timelines of knowledge. If engines were failing so predictably, when did the company first know? And why did it wait so long to act? Timeline games. Chronology is supposed to bring clarity, yet in this scandal, the timeline became a weapon of confusion. The official record claimed that the first indications of crankshaft and bearing defects surfaced in early 2004, that internal committees reviewed data through spring, and that by April of 2025, the situation had escalated into a full recall. To the casual observer, this sequence sounded deliberate and responsible. The company appeared to have discovered a defect, studied it, confirmed the risk, and then acted with precision. But when owner stories and leaked documents entered the conversation, the neat chronology unraveled into something far murkier, a clash of dates and testimonies that cast doubt on the entire narrative. Drivers in online communities had been sounding alarms far earlier, posting photos of seized engines in late 2002 and throughout 2002. Mechanics uploaded teardown videos showing scored bearings, pitted journals, and clogged oil passages. Families described breakdowns on highways months before the official timeline acknowledged the issue. In dealership service bays, employees quietly admitted they had seen similar failures, but they were instructed to treat each case as an isolated incident. The difference between what owners lived and what official paperwork recorded was not measured in days or weeks, but in years. This mismatch created the sense of a deliberate delay. If internal reports already documented abnormal wear in 2022, why was decisive action postponed until 2025? Critics argued the reason was financial. Delaying a recall meant fewer warranty payouts, fewer headlines, and fewer ripples in the stock market. By the time an official recall was launched, thousands of owners had already endured breakdowns, tows, and expensive fights over coverage. The delay turned every stranded vehicle into evidence of a timeline managed not for safety, but for damage control. Even the language of the timeline carried subtle manipulations. Early memos described potential wear instead of catastrophic failure. Committee minutes referred to isolated claims rather than systemic patterns. In public filings, the story was reframed to show a gradual discovery rather than an urgent crisis. To the families stranded on interstates or contractors watching fleets fail, these word choices felt like erasure. Their lived reality had been scrubbed from the calendar to protect corporate image. When lawmakers began requesting documentation, the contradictions sharpened. Congressional staff pointed to owner complaints logged with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in 2002. well before the company admitted to any problem. Attorneys presented warranty data showing spikes in claims that preceded the official start of investigations. Each new piece of evidence lengthened the shadow over the official timeline. The fight over chronology revealed more than dates. It exposed a strategy, shaped the story of when knowledge began so that accountability could be minimized. But buried warnings and conflicting timelines cannot be hidden forever. As this layer peeled away, another revelation loomed: the troubling reality that silence itself had been chosen over safety. Silence over safety. In every great industrial controversy, there comes a moment when leadership must decide whether to speak loudly or stay silent. In this scandal, the choice was silence, and that silence proved devastating. Owners were experiencing engines that locked without warning, sometimes after only a few months of use, and yet there was no sweeping bulletin, no urgent call to dealerships, no mass communication campaign that could have warned drivers of the dangers ahead. Instead, customers were met with carefully chosen words, with reassurances that their failures were isolated, that their maintenance might have been questionable, and that no systemic risk existed. This deliberate quiet allowed production lines to keep humming, but it left ordinary families stranded on highways, wondering why their loyalty was rewarded with indifference. The strategy of silence did not appear overnight. It was shaped by committees, crafted by communications teams, and executed by dealerships that were instructed to handle each breakdown as if it were an unrelated event. In practice, this meant thousands of people lived the same nightmare, but they were told they were alone. One driver waiting for a tow in the middle of winter might believe he was unlucky. Another contractor watching his work truck die at 62,000 miles might think maintenance schedules had betrayed him. But in reality, these stories formed a chorus intentionally muted by silence from the top. The psychological impact was enormous. Customers who had believed in the rugged reliability of their engines began to doubt themselves. They were told by service managers that perhaps the oil had not been changed on time, or that perhaps towing loads were too heavy, or that perhaps fuel quality had played a role. In truth, the deeper flaw had nothing to do with owner behavior. It lay in misaligned crankshafts, scarring bearings, and clogged oil passages. But by silencing the systemic nature of the issue, blame was shifted onto those who had trusted the brand most. This silence also protected financial interests. Every month without an official recall meant fewer warranty claims, fewer headlines, and fewer investors asking difficult questions. In the short term, the strategy seemed to work. Production continued, sales remained strong, and quarterly reports showed resilience. But beneath that calm exterior, frustration grew. Online forums swelled with testimonies, photographs, and detailed records of failures. Mechanics shared tear-down videos revealing catastrophic wear after fewer than 20,000 miles. Each voice that was silenced in the service bay found a megaphone on the internet, building a digital archive that the corporation could not mute. Eventually, lawmakers and regulators took notice. When silence collides with undeniable evidence, it no longer looks like caution. It looks like concealment. And once concealment enters the conversation, reputational damage grows faster than any engine failure rate. What began as a decision to withhold information soon became the symbol of misplaced priorities. Silence over safety defined not just the recall, but the culture that allowed it. And from that silence emerged a new truth, one tied to the protective shield presented to the public as a fix, but revealed to be something far less. If you've stayed with me this far, you know these secrets go deeper than headlines. Subscribe now so you never miss the next chapter, because the upcoming revelations will shake everything you thought you knew about trust and safety. The public shield. There are times when the remedy offered is not a cure, but a disguise. And in this scandal, the so-called fix became nothing more than a public shield. When the recall instructions were finally released, many expected redesigned components, reinforced bearings, or even buyback programs. Instead, the solution presented to owners was deceptively simple. Drain the original 0W20 oil and refill with the thicker 0W40 specification. Oil caps were swapped, manuals updated, and service centers affixed stickers that announced compliance. On paper, it looked like a technical adjustment rooted in science. In reality, it was a shield meant to deflect outrage while buying time, a patch designed to protect corporate image more than the drivers who trusted their machines. Laboratory data was used to justify the move. Charts showed that under heat stress, the thicker viscosity offered better film strength and could delay catastrophic wear. Executives could point to this evidence and argue they had acted responsibly. Yet that evidence existed only in controlled conditions, far removed from the real world of towing trailers up mountain grades, idling through heavy traffic, or hauling loads in 100-degree heat. Outside the laboratory, the change in oil carried consequences that were impossible to ignore. Fuel efficiency dropped, with some owners reporting 3 fewer miles per gallon, a shift that over 150,000 miles meant thousands of dollars burned at the pump. Beyond fuel costs, the stigma attached to the new specification proved corrosive. Vehicles flagged with the updated oil instantly became suspect in the resale market. Databases recorded the change, dealerships noted the adjustment, and private buyers grew wary. A $70,000 truck or sport utility vehicle suddenly lost value overnight, not because the owner had neglected maintenance, but because a corporate shield had branded the machine as flawed. That financial scar was carried by households, not by the corporation that issued the directive. The most unsettling aspect of this so-called solution was how deliberately it shifted the burden. By offering a visible but shallow adjustment, leadership could claim action while sidestepping responsibility. Owners were left with higher costs, lower resale value, and mounting suspicion, realizing the shield was built to protect profits, not people. The deeper problem was never viscosity. It was the alignment of crankshafts, the debris left in oil passages, and the accelerated wear on rod bearings. None of these were solved by swapping fluids. The public shield did not heal the defect, it merely delayed the explosion. Critics argued, with growing evidence, that the thicker oil simply pushed engine failures beyond the 5-year or 60,000-mile warranty boundary. From a corporate perspective, each delayed failure represented savings. From a consumer perspective, it represented betrayal. What looked like decisive action was, in truth, a strategy of postponement. The shield was never meant to endure forever. It was meant to deflect long enough to protect balance sheets and calm headlines. Yet shields eventually crack under pressure, and when they do, the truth behind them becomes impossible to ignore. As anger over the superficial fix spread, attention turned to the most devastating revelation of all: the shattering of trust itself, a wound deeper than any mechanical flaw. Trust shattered. Confidence is the invisible engine that keeps industries moving, and when that confidence fails, even the strongest machines cannot carry the weight. The most devastating revelation of this entire scandal was not just that engines failed, not just that oil was changed, and not just that warnings were buried. The ultimate blow was the collapse of trust. Once customers believed they were buying reliability forged in steel, but revelations of delays, deflections, and half-measures left them feeling abandoned. Trust had been marketed as part of the price tag, but it evaporated faster than any warranty coverage, leaving behind only bitterness and betrayal. For generations, working families and small businesses invested in these vehicles with the belief that they were purchasing more than horsepower. They were investing in tradition, in durability, and in a symbol of American strength. Fathers taught sons to respect the machine. Contractors built livelihoods around fleets, and communities measured pride by the reliability parked in their driveways. But when engines began seizing on highways, when service centers offered little more than shrugs, and when recall remedies amounted to stickers on oil caps, the foundation cracked. The realization spread. Loyalty had been rewarded with neglect. The emotional toll of this collapse is difficult to measure, yet its impact can be seen in countless testimonies. A driver stranded with children in the back seat does not remember technical bulletins. He remembers fear. A contractor forced to cancel jobs because trucks failed at 61,000 miles does not recall laboratory charts. He recalls disappointment. A family that financed $75,000 for a vehicle that lost value overnight does not think about viscosity adjustments. They think about betrayal. These stories repeated across thousands of households, and together they created a cultural wound far deeper than any mechanical flaw. This wound extended into the broader marketplace. Dealerships once buzzing with brand loyalty now reported walkouts from customers who refused to test drive. Online communities that had previously celebrated ownership became hubs of resistance, collecting documents, organizing lawsuits, and amplifying voices of discontent. Even investors, usually buffered by quarterly profits, saw the erosion of confidence reflected in stock downgrades and cautious forecasts. The fracture was no longer contained to engines. It spread into identity, reputation, and financial stability. Repairing such a wound requires more than technical fixes or carefully worded apologies. Engines can be rebuilt, warranties can be extended, and lawsuits can be settled. But trust, once broken, rarely returns. It lingers as doubt in every new purchase, as skepticism in every advertisement, as hesitation in every handshake between dealer and buyer. Critics warned that this shattering of faith would echo for decades, shaping how consumers judged not only this company, but the entire industry. And so the final secret is not hidden in documents or buried in oil passages. It lives in the minds of those who once believed. Trust, the most valuable commodity in the automotive world, has been shattered, and no recall can ever truly replace it. You've now seen the buried warnings, the oil gambit, the timeline games, and the silence that cost drivers their trust. But this story isn't finished. The fallout is still unfolding, and every week new details surface. Don't let the next revelation pass you by. Hit like to push this truth further. Share your thoughts in the comments so your voice is counted, and most importantly, subscribe right now.